Okay, I'm just going to make a quick video here. I haven't done a whole lot, but this is, well, technically it's day 3, but I've only put really 2 days worth of work into this thing. So I've just been, piecing it back together bit by bit. And I put some of the larger parts back on this thing just to, get them situated and out of the way. So I put the dipstick on from the old motor. I put the fuel pump on because it still has the gasket back there, and I had to be careful with the way it was positioned around this governor spring, and I hooked that up, and I also hooked up the link for the throttle shaft. So that's ready to go. The carburetor and air cleaner just have to go on, but I'm curious to see how the throttle response is on this, because these Kohlers don't have the best throttle response. I think we all know that. The breaker points, I was having a bit of trouble with them because the old breaker points wire that runs from the coil to the point was on the K241, but this one didn't have a wire, and the one on the K241 wouldn't exactly fit. It was too short. So I went out and bought some 14 gauge wire today, and I added a couple connectors to it and used electrical tape and hooked it up to the coil with new nuts and washers, and ran it through the harness and everything to the other side, and it actually turned out pretty good. That's my biggest fear, because you don't want to, for obvious reasons, you don't want to have too much voltage or not enough voltage or the wrong type of wire on it. So I'm just really curious to see how that goes. It just kind of goes behind the flywheel here and comes out to the breaker points here. Today I also mounted the bearing plate on the motor for the PTO. This is where the mill drive pulley bolts on right here. Other than that, it doesn't serve much of a purpose rather than to hold the PTO clutch on. That's why it has these couple studs, but that's about it. I still have to swap over the main pulley and the crankshaft key from the K241. I don't think you can see that really. I don't have a gear puller, so I'll have to borrow one from someone. I'll have to figure that out. So that's that. And then today I painted the muffler mounting, or the muffler shroud box, I guess you want to call it. This is the first piece. Then you put the muffler on it, and then the muffler shroud bolts to this and goes around it. I gave it a shot of the heat-resistant paint, and then I gave it a shot of clear coat, and actually didn't exactly turn out as I wanted it, but it's only going to heat up and the paint's going to peel and everything like that, so there's no point. I got some new screws and washers and held them in there. There's 3 different spots where they go in, and then there's one there. Then it mounts right here too. Here's the clamp for the muffler. I also put a nylon lock nut on this little ground bracket right here with the hole in it for the lift and the chain. I put a new nylon nut on it because the nylon nut, I don't have to worry about trying to tighten it down, because the further down that I tightened the nut, it was pushing down on this top piece here. So I put a nylon nut on it. I can get it so it wasn't really pushing down on the metal, it wasn't bending the metal, and the nylon nut will actually stay in place. So that's good. Here's the carburetor. I just took some degreaser and cleaned the grease off of the outside of it. And then real quick, here's a look at the tractor. Yesterday I spent probably more time than I should have. I took the 2 motor mounts off, and this is something I actually should have done when I had it apart the very first time. I just never bothered to do it. I got the old mounts off, and I ended up rounding off the bolts and everything and the nuts that were holding them on, because they were the original bolts. So I got rid of them, and I got a couple new bolts. I just haven't put them on yet, obviously. But here's the mounts over here in good shape. This is the later one, so it has a 2-piece cradle. And last year I replaced these 2 front rubber isolators, or rubber mounts. They're held on there with 2 rivets, and I drilled the rivets out and put 8mm bolts with nylon nuts on them to keep them from backing out. And then I spent a couple hours yesterday doing the same thing here. I had a bit of a mishap with the drill, because the drill's a piece of crap and it kept overheating. But I eventually managed to drill through and punch out both of the old mounts. as you can see there. So I ordered 2 new mounts, or isolators, so I'm just waiting for them to come in, and then I can, once the motor's ready to go in, the mistake I made last time was the mount was not sitting flat, so it was hard to mount the motor up. So I'm going to I'll put the rubber isolators on it, and then put the motor mounts on the motor at the bottom of the block, and then we can drop it in, and it'll make it much easier. So we're getting there. I mean, all I'm waiting for now is the 2 gaskets for the carburetor, the mounting gasket and the air filter gasket. The gasket goes here, and then the other gasket goes around here, because both of the old gaskets were no good. So I'm waiting for them to come in. I can mount the carburetor and the air cleaner. Like I said, I have to mount the pulley and the crankshaft key. And I have to swap the K241 had a pretty new spark plug in it, and this one's old. They actually left it in there when they painted the block, so I'm going to swap that out. All this is good. Starters mounted, coils mounted, and everything. I had a little mishap with the bolts, and I figured, you know what, maybe I'll get new bolts to replace it just to make it look nice, but they're very specific, and sometimes it's hard to find them in the hardware stores and everything. So I said, you know what, I'm just going to skip that step and leave it with the bolts that it came with originally. So I did, except for these couple screws here, but that's no big deal. I still have a little more work to do, so it's not completely done yet, and I have more work to do to the tractor itself more work to do to the tractor itself than to the motor. So that's an update for day 2/3, the actual 3rd day since since I started, but the 2nd day that I've really put work into it. So we're coming along. Okay, I'm going to try to make this quick. I'm not sure if I showed this in the last clip or not, but I drilled out the old motor mounts and replaced these 2 back ones. And I replaced the front ones last year when right before I put the motor in it, the old 10-horse Kohler in it. And instead of using rivets again, like these are originally held in with rivets in the corners, I used a little 8mm bolt with a nylon lock nut so I can remove them and so they don't back out. And I did the same thing here. I ordered 2 more mounts and tightened them up with nylon nuts. And yesterday I got my carburetor mounting gasket, the intake gasket rather, and mounted the carburetor up, all good and tight and everything. Haven't put the air cleaner on it though, because I'm still waiting for this gasket here, but I'll be able to adjust the carburetor once I get it running. So that's good to go for now. And I hooked up the fuel line and pump. There's the pump there. So I basically just have to drop it in and hook the connectors in, and she should be ready to go. I replaced well, actually, the first thing you can see, the mistake that I made last time was I didn't mount the motor to the 2-piece cradle before I put it in, and that made things really hard, especially with having to put these new mounts in it with the nuts and everything. So I made sure not to make that mistake this time. You can see the front cradle sits higher than the rear, obviously, and I made sure to replace the mounts because these things, love to vibrate, and this one's got a little more horsepower and torque than the little 10-horse Kohler, so it's going to need it's going to not need to shake as much. I mean, the shaking is power, as Slow Ride 55 once told me, and he's right. So, but when you're spending so many hours mowing with one of these, it's not too pleasant. So the less vibration we can get is probably the better. So I'm getting ready to drop this in, so I just have to take these bolts out. I had them in here for safekeeping. I put the bolts in with nylon nuts, of course, because they weigh less and they don't back out. And when you work on a sprint car or any kind of race car, saving weight and being efficient is one of your biggest concerns. So you get into a habit of using these. Kind of wish I bought these in the first place, but I didn't know better then. So, so now let's get ready to drop this motor in. Should be getting spark. I hope it's getting spark. Let me check. Well, I got the K301 to run, finally. As you can tell, she still isn't quite right. This thing was a pain to start because this connector for the ground wire broke, so I had to hold it to this ground bolt here while I was cranking it. And because the spark plug is in a different spot on the head than the old motor was, the spark plug cable was just a little too short, so I had to improvise. I stuck a screw in there and electrical taped it. So I'm just going to go over it. I'm going to replace the spark plug, see if that'll fix the problem, and adjust the carburetor a little bit. She's adjusted just like she was on the K241. I haven't messed with it at all. So I doubt it's a fuel problem because it's definitely getting fuel. The big problem is probably the breaker points. I don't think I have the gap set properly, but you can see the new set of points on there. And I'm running it without the muffler because I haven't put it on yet. I need to get it adjusted first. She sounds pretty good though. I mean, backfire. I'm not going to run it hard just yet. You can see all the compression coming out of the breather tube. Pretty crazy. This thing's got brand new rings put in it. It actually hasn't been run yet with the rings. This is the first time the rings have been run, so the rings have to seat. But it's been run after the rebuild. It was bored out 0.1 of an inch oversized, and was run for a little bit, and then the guy that I bought it from took it apart again and put new rings in it. So I should have taken all my crap off of it first, like the feeler gauge and everything. But I was just messing around with it. I stuck a screw in the spark plug wire and the end of the wire and touched it to the inside of the coil after I had soldered the coil, and she fired up. It was just barely making connection. I think, like I said before, I think the problem was that the spark plug wire was too short and it didn't quite reach, so that might also be why it's not running quite right. But like I said, I gotta keep messing with the breaker points. The throttle's not hooked up, so and I replaced these two isolators back here too, and she still vibrates. Sounds a bit like a Harley. Maybe I can drive it up to my uncle's shop and see if he can get the breaker points adjusted for me. He showed me how to do it because I never messed with breaker points before, so I'm kind of new to the whole points ignition system. But yeah. So I'll mess around with the carburetor a little bit, and I'm sure it's not a carburetor problem. I'm sure it's the points and everything. But I replaced the points in the condenser, as you can see, and and I had my uncle solder a new wire for the breaker points on the top of the coil, and then I mounted the coil the other way, so the negative post is on the top, and hooked the condenser up to it. So obviously don't want to mess with it while it's running. I just figured I would run the wire for the points over the top instead of having to worry about lifting it out and running it underneath it again. So